Part 1. The Curse Within the Bloodline. There is a silence older than time, and in the cliffs of northern Gaul, it hummed beneath stone and snow. Perched like a crow's final prayer, the Valmarth estate stood, a castle of pale bone-colored limestone, carved by forgotten hands, and shadowed even at noon. It watched the land like a cathedral to something buried. It was said that their blood was sacred, not in the way of saints, but in the way poison is sacred to vipers. A bloodline that healed itself, a line that survived not by chance, but by ritual, but not dead. The villagers down the valley called it La Maison du Sang, the House of Blood. The roads to Valmarth were buried beneath weeks of snow, the forests too dense to cross, and the last hunting dog had frozen inside the estate. Lord Emmeric's household was starving. Fires could not warm the stone. Meat could not be found. Faith could not be chewed, not with reverence, but with old, shaking voices, like a story they wished they had never remembered. He did not scream. When he stopped breathing, no one cried. The soup was red and rich, and no one dared ask what floated within it. The Volmariths were not royalty. They had no crowns, no courts, only lineage, and sometimes far more dangerous lineage is enough. And every ritual begins with a story, a birthright earned by pain, by prophecy, by blood as old as Genesis. In the frostbitten December of 1349, Europe was choking on the Black Death, consumed not with savagery, but with ceremony. Bone burned to ash, skin rendered to oils, hearts wrapped in silk and buried beneath a table of communion. That winter, Emmeric's youngest son, Adrien, just 8 years old, fell quiet. His eyes sunk, his fingers curled into brittle claws. They placed his body in the wine cellar, not from cruelty, from silence. It did not bloat. It gave off no scent of decay. Instead, there was sweetness, a perfume of iron and fruit. And an old woman in the household, once a midwife, now more whispered than flesh herself, said what others feared to say. From cold, from waiting for spring. But something strange happened. His body, after a week, did not rot. The boy carries it, the blood remembers. The next evening, a pot boiled. The servants avoided the kitchen. When the Lord Emmeric drank, he slept for 12 hours straight, and when he woke he stood, straight-backed, clear-eyed, stronger. He asked for more. It was not spoken of again, not in letters, not in prayer, not in shame, only remembered in marrow and tongue. The family said it was not cannibalism. No, it was preservation. It was their right. And so it began. Every generation, one child disappeared. The stammerer they became inheritance. This was not madness. This was tradition. And the line of Valmarith, strengthened with its own blood, did not die. And the silence beneath the stone began to hum again. Part 2. The Inheritance of Flesh. By the winter of 1378. 3 generations had passed since the first pot was stirred. The estate was quieter now, no longer bursting with the echo of hounds or harp. But he had lived to see nothing unthinkable when plague and famine chewed Europe to bone. His portrait, painted just weeks before his death, showed a man half his age. The artist disappeared shortly after. That in consuming the body of one who shares your blood, you inherit more than strength. You inherit dreams, desires, fears, a fragment of the soul itself, not metaphor, not magic. Science, in a time before the word, a thin frost veiled its windows year-round, as if the land itself recoiled from what it sheltered. Lord Emmeric had died in his eyes open, jaw slack, the last drops of his lineage's soup still warm on his lips. The next heir, Lorien Valmarith, was not a man of war like his forebears, but of study. He did not spill blood with sword, but with quill, pale, quiet, with eyes like the moon over still water. Her fingers trembled when she held a spoon. Lorien watched, waited a door that opened only when he spoke her name, and one night while the rest of the household drank clove wine and hummed hollow songs, he took her gently by the hand and said, in the dust-choked library, among scrolls bound with leather so pale it was mistaken for lamp, Lorien found the Codex Veritas Caresta, Book of Blood's truth. It did not grant power. It shared at worst, it shared guilt, her fears, her prayers, her hatred, bound in skin, written in mirrored Latin, and sealed with a lock of hair not yet gray. The book spoke of sympathia corpusca, a sacred link of flesh to memory, marrow to will to Lorien. This was not horror, it was revelation. His younger sister Mirelle was already fading. It will not hurt, you will live on. She did not scream. In the weeks that followed, Lorien dreamed of a white door beneath the roots of the house, a door that breathed. Behind it he remembered things he had never lived. Meryl's voice in his head, her hatred of him. The blood remembers. The ritual had worked, but not as he imagined. And in the corners of the estate Lorien began to hear something, a whisper through cracks in stone, a soft chewing, as if the walls were hungry, as if the house itself had developed a taste for kin. Part 3. The house with a thirst. Years passed, but the estate refused to age. Ivy grew and died in strange rhythms, curling back as if repulsed by its own reach. They spoke of waking up with dried blood beneath his nails and words written on the walls in languages he never studied. Some pages were torn out with precision, replaced by strands of hair or small bones sewn into the binding. The stones remained unstained despite the rains. Visitors, few as they were, spoke of a smell, sweet and metallic, like wine left too long in copper. None stayed past sundown. Lorien never married, he claimed no heir, but behind locked doors, he kept journals that grew more erratic each season. He began hearing Meryl's laugh echoing in his study. Not always mocking, sometimes it cried and sometimes ... it sang. In 1404, during Lent, the family chapel collapsed inward. No tremor was felt, no storm reported. The altar cracked like bone under pressure. In its hollow, workers uncovered a pit lined not with dirt, but with teeth. Hundreds of human teeth, sorted by size. Among them, the skull of a woman with no jaw. But silence is loud in places like Valmarath Manor. The walls whispered. Doors opened where there were none. Lamps flickered and dimmed at the mention of names long buried. Lorien ordered the whole sealed that same night, offering double wages for silence, that the mind of the devoured could rise, like fog, inside the eater. That love, grief, and rage could root in marrow. Servants left. Dogs howled at corners. One maid, newly hired, gouged her own eyes out after claiming the house had started blinking at her. Still, Lorien stayed, because what he feared outside was less than what lived within. He wrote of blood echoes and memory imprints, that the body when consumed in the correct order releases not just power, but personality. But what he didn't expect was that those thoughts could bloom, that Meryl could learn to push back. He began forgetting his own name in mirrors. And once, while trimming his nails, he looked down and saw small hands nod his. In the end, Lorien Valmarath wasn't consumed by madness. He was consumed by memory, and it wore his body like a suit. Part 4. The Banquet of Ash and Necho in the Dead of Winter, 1411. After 3 years of silence, the great iron gates of the Valmarath estate groaned open, not with fanfare, but with a hunger that smelled of roasted flesh and something older than meat. No parchment, no seal, just a voice in each ear. Hundreds trudged uphill, eyes hollow, tongues dry. Each chair, lacquered black and inhumanly tall, faced inward toward a central pit shrouded in red silk. Braziers burned incense thick enough to drown thought. Flies gathered above them, but no one swatted them away. No one questioned why. Something wearing his skin. The surrounding villagers, gaunt and brittle from frost and famine, looked up from their frozen fields and toward the distant manor on the hill. Smoke rose from its long-dead chimneys. Bells rang low and slow, not for worship but for something else. An invitation arrived by wind. You are called. Come feed. What feeds you? Others claimed they could hear names whispered behind their teeth, names they didn't recognize, but loved. Children giggled under the table, speaking to shadows. No one stopped them. No one dared, to those who came before, and remain within us still. Not a bone, not a scrap of fat, not even a fingerprint on the goblet. The table stood bare, almost mournful. And they did. He scribbled one sentence before fleeing the estate and vanishing. The banquet hall, once a skeletal ruin, stood reborn, its ceiling arched like the ribs of a whale. The long wooden tables gleamed as if waxed by ghosts. At the far end stood Lorien Val. Infants opened their eyes moments after birth and cried in forgotten dialects. Crops grew twisted and bountiful, their roots forming shapes akin to runes. A monk who tried to translate them went mute within a week. His hands blistered into claws. He had not aged. His hair, now white as marrow, eyes black without iris, his lips, sewn with golden thread, moved as if in echo. And yet the voice that issued forth was warm, like wine, like mercy real. The flavor was complex, like remembering a lullaby you'd only heard once, but in the womb. Bread broke apart like old scripture. Wine tasted faintly of tears and spice. A priest from Senderland's cloister bit into something red and wept sobbing, "Forgive me," over and over again until silence folded him to the blessed sustenance. He raised a chalice, carved not of gold nor glass, but of bleached antler, polished and humming faintly. And then the feast began. Bowls of meat were passed, steaming, glistening with unfamiliar fat. The villagers did not ask what animal. They kept eating. Some said the food made their skin warmer, as if fire crawled inside their bellies. And when dawn approached, there were no leftovers. Devon, a chronicler sent by the bishopric in secret, watched in horror from behind a tapestry. They were eating memory, and it remembered being whole. But the feast had only just begun. In the months following, a fever gripped the valley, not of heat or sweat, but of knowing. The villagers dreamed of spirals of stairs made from ribs, of doors that bled, of women singing from beneath floor. And by the next full moon, no summons was given. Still, every seat was filled again. And this time, no one left. Part 5. Those born from the feast. By spring of 1412, no child in the valley was born screaming. They emerged from the womb silent, blinking once as if to say, I have returned. Midwives whispered of strange birthmarks shaped like twisted vines. Some children had teeth before they had breath. Some never blinked. All of them stared too long into firelight. Their parents, at first, wept in shame, then in confusion, but never in protests, because these children spoke to them, not aloud, not with mouths, but through dreams. And all of them were hungry. They would not feed from milk, not even the richest goat's cream, but they'd gnawed at roots, bones, and wind left alone rats. Now I grow inside you. At night the villagers could hear them humming lullabies that no one taught, songs that circled around the theme of offering, rebirth, and something beneath the soil that thirsted like a god. The elders called them the blue. The priests called them godless echoes. But the Valmarith scrolls had a different name, Ligni-Kanis. For these children, flesh was not the vessel. No one had pulled the rope. The children wore them, and as the moon rose, they began to dance, but not in play. It was the seed, one by one, offering slices of skin from their own forearms, laid at the feet of the masked children. The blood soaked into the soil, vanishing instantly. They grew fast. By age 5, they walked like soldiers. By age 7, they recited genealogies of the Valmarith line better than any scholar. About fire, about sealing the valley forever. But none returned from that meeting, not one. Their bodies were never found, but their voices were heard, days later, coming from the mouths of the children. Exact words, same inflections. One child, Eleanor, aged 8, slid open his own arm during Mass and whispered, "It grows back when the moon is full." It did. The cathedral bells rang off time that evening. It was unnamed, simply understood. At dusk, the children walked hand in hand to the river's edge. There, they dug up something with their bare fingers. A trunk, no, not of wood, of bone. Layered, ribbed, like the chest of a thing, too large to be buried whole. Behind closed doors, the town council met, whispering about exorcism. And then came the festival, not one from the calendar of saints, nor from Roman rites. From it, they pulled masks. Each mask looked like the face of someone recently dead, stitched with moss and soot. In invocation, villagers came not to stop them but to kneel. A girl with one blue eye and one black whispered, "We are their mouths now, and you are their choir." That night, fires did not go out. They grew brighter, and something hummed back from the trees. By morning, the river no longer reflected faces, only bones, and the children had new teeth. Part 6. The nun who drank the ancestral blood. Her name was Sister Ver. Once a healer, once a songbird in the chapel choir of Montcalm, she had come to the valley with Holy Writ in one hand and a dagger in the other. The church had sent her not to cleanse, but to understand, to witness. Varel arrived dressed in grey, her habits soaked from the rain, and her boots muddied with miles of silence. At first, they welcomed her. The children even bowed. One touched her rosary and smiled, whispering, "Your prayers reach only the shallow graves." Within 2 days, she stopped eating. Her tongue burned during Mass. Her cross melted in the sun. That night, she dreamt of a staircase descending through ribs into a cellar of lungs, each breathing in slow, reversed rhythm. Not by fasting, but because everything tasted like ash. The bread, the water, even the Eucharist. And in the center, a chalice. Not gold, not silver. Bone. She woke with blood in her mouth. Not with footsteps, but with gaze. Wherever she walked, they were watching. Even when her door was locked. Even when she prayed, not in one gulp but in intervals, each swallow bringing visions of faces she had never seen, places she had never walked, names she had never heard but instantly mourned. Especially when she prayed, the children began to follow her. On the 7th day, she was taken to the crypt beneath the manor, the supposed burial site of the first Valmarith patriarch. But the tomb was empty. Instead, there stood a table carved with teeth. Upon it a single item. The vessel of continuance, as the children called it, a chalice of ancestral marrow, sealed tight with wax and sinew, said to contain the blood of every leader who had consumed themselves to continue the line. "Drink," said the girl with the uneven eyes. "Or forget why you came." Varel refused. But the dreams did not. That night she saw herself walking through the bones of the mountain, each step echoing back the cries of martyrs who had failed to understand. A voice followed her, not threatening, but patient. It whispered of union, not control, of remembrance, not power, of the flesh as passage. The next evening, she stood in the chapel and uncorked the chalice. The blood was not rotten. It shimmered like mercury and sang like a choir. She drank. She collapsed. When she awoke, her body bore the birthmark of the and the children now called her Mother of the Rejoining. Her sermons changed. No more Latin, no more scripture, only born rhymes. The flesh you give is the bridge you build. The root grows in sacrifice, not soil. Blood, when remembered, becomes voice. She was no longer an observer. She had joined the feast. Part 7. The third red night. It began with the bells warped and hollow, not rung by hand but by marrow. Somewhere in the chapel tower, bones had been bound in a ring of sinew and wood. suspended to chime only when the air remembered the correct note. And that night, the note returned. Some said it came during the Crusades, others whispered of older fires, older gods, older hungers, that had worn the mask of faith long before swords bore crosses. Each inhabitant of the valley, from the eldest grandmother to the smallest child, walked barefoot to the central altar carrying offerings of flesh, not others, but their own, nails broken and tied in braids, teeth set into wax. But the third red night was marked, deliberate, chosen. None knew the true date of the first red night. The sky itself seemed hesitant. Clouds hovered like held breath, and the moon, full and motionless, cast no light. The manor doors opened, not with keys, but blood. Slices of skin wrapped in silk. It wasn't mutilation, it was remembrance. Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Every breath she drew hummed with the tone of the bloodline. The children repeated her every word before she spoke it, their mouths moving half a second early, like they already knew. Sister Varel, now draped in robes woven from human hair and lamb's wool, stood at the pulpit. Inside, not blood, but what blood had become after being remembered for too long. Thick, pulsing, silver black and warm. It breathed. On the first red night, she said, because by the end of the ritual, each person's palm bore the Valmarith seal, not tattooed or branded. It hovered an inch above the earth, refusing to mix with what had been remade, but embedded beneath the flesh, a vein pattern that shimmered faintly in candlelight. We learned the price of separation. On the second, we offered silence. But tonight, we offer return. And then the trough was brought out. Not a creature, not a voice, but a memory so old it had forgotten its own shape. A long stone basin carved with rows of interlocking vertebrae, its edges stained with centuries of dried marrow. One by one, they dipped their hands, not just to coat, but to meld. The skin burned. Some screamed, others sang. Some wept, but none left. Those who failed to accept the blood did not die. They simply vanished, as if their name had never been part of the line. Later that night, it rained. But the water did not touch the valley. In the final hour, Varel took her place at the head of the trough. She whispered a single phrase. I am the door between breath and echo. And the trough answered. Then pass. The floor cracked. Beneath it, something ancient stirred. The third red night ended without a single scream, because they had all become ... 1. Part 8. The room that couldn't be drawn. There was a room beneath the Valmarith estate, but no one could say what it looked like, not even those who entered and returned. The moment you stepped beyond the 12th stair, the lines of geometry betrayed themselves. Shapes folded where walls should have stood, and shadows formed not from light, but from expectation. They called it the room that couldn't be drawn, because every attempt to describe it led to contradiction. Circular doors that opened into corridors with corners, a ceiling both above and beneath. Time thickened. Air refused to be breathed unless you forgot your own name. And still they descended. It was not the Bloodline's vault. It wasn't written in language, it was written in remains. Each line made of powdered bone, crushed memory, and the iron of someone forgotten. Thousands, no, tens of thousands layered from centuries of voluntary offering. Each child of Valmarith upon their 7th year had plucked a tooth and cast it here. The floor whispered with soft, brittle prayer. It was their womb. Sister Varel stood at the threshold, clutching a book bound in skin not from any earthly animal. The script inside pulsed and rearranged, resisting translation. This was where the rite of continuance must be performed. One to drink the future. But there was no altar, only a vast, shifting floor of teeth. Not blood memory, but the exact sound of your mother saying your name the moment before she dies. Aranis's youngest son of the now Silas Liaram followed behind Varel. He held the twin chalices, one silver, one obsidian, one to carry the past. He asked her, will we remember it after it's done? Varel didn't answer, because remembrance was the price. They reached the center. Aranis poured from both chalices into the bowl between them. The mixture hissed, burnt cold. Around them, the teeth shivered. Above them, no ceiling, only a slow spiral of bone lattice, rising infinitely. And in that lattice the oldest ancestors still lived, not as Bodhis, but as ... watchers. Flesh-consumed names etched into silence, but eyes, dozens of them blinking in bone. The rite began. Varel whispered a word not meant for language. From the spiral, a drop fell, not water. It struck the mixture, and it sang. Not a melody, not a scream. Aranis wept. The floor of teeth opened. Something underneath reached up, not a hand, not a limb, but a choice, clothed in nerve and regret. Varel bowed her head. May we never forget what was required. And then she drank. Part 9. The Inheritance of Hunger. Varel knelt in the circle of salt and marrow, the goblet still warm in her hands. Her lips trembled, but not from fear. It was as if every muscle in her face strained to contain something too ancient, too vast. Not pain, not ecstasy, but memory. It was like drowning in a sea made of her own blood, and the blood of those she never knew but always carried. The goblet fell from her hand, still half full, but her throat convulsed, trying to speak the unspeakable. Not hers. There's every ancestor, every sacrificial whisper, every cry that was swallowed before it became a sound all flooded her at once. Ernest stood beside her silent. He knew this phase. He had seen it in his sister, his grandmother, even in his own reflection, when he once dared to taste the locket hidden behind the altar of 8 veins, like the hum of an insect crawling through the throat of a corpse. But she didn't scream, she listened, and what she heard broke her. Her hands clawed the floor, nails bleeding against bone-tiled stone. Then she turned to him. "Or I will eat the names of our dead, sir." From beneath his ceremonial cloak, he retrieved the sacred bundle, linen soaked in brine, stitched with hair of matriarchs long and he unwrapped it slowly, reverently, until the object revealed itself, and her eyes were crying blood. "You must feed me now," she whispered. Small cracks spidered through the skeletal dome, and from the fractures, white worms descended. They landed on the stone like ash, whispering forgotten sins. Every sin ever committed by a Arenas did not speak. He moved, swift a chorus, but not of voices. It was the echo of chewing, the crunch of teeth on bone, yet no mouths moved. A tongue. She had dared question the flesh pact, had dared invoke outside gods. Her punishment had been more than death. Her words were ripped, her voice erased, and her tongue kept, as warning and sacrament. Brown, hardened, salt-preserved for over 300 years, the tongue of Serenthia Valmaritha, her first daughter who had refused the rite. She did not bite it, dissolved, as if her hunger had become chemical. Her eyes rolled white, her spine arched. A gasp, and silence. "It is not food," Ernest intoned. "It is continuity." Varel took it with shaking hands and pressed it against her lips. Then the room groaned. The spiral etched in the ceiling began to pulse, not with light but with gravity. And from below, beneath the altar itself, a sound rose. The house remembered. Outside, across the estate, bells tolled. No one rang them, but every servant dropped to their knees, cups falling, irons cooling, hands frozen mid-prayer, because they knew the rite had succeeded. The bloodline had awakened, but it was hungry now, and hunger, in this house, was inherited. Part 10. The final offering. The bells stopped, not faded. Around him, the house inhaled a great, dry breath through floorboards and bones. Every painting blinked once. Every candle flared and then died, though the darkness that followed was not empty. It was aware, stopped, as if the air itself forgot how to carry sound. Arenas stood frozen in the hall of veins, his hands still outstretched from the offering. Varel still knelt, but her body was changing. The skin along her arms began to peel in delicate layers, like rice paper scorched at the edges. Beneath it was not flesh but runes, etched directly into sinew, glowing faintly with a color that did not exist until that moment. Her voice, when it returned, did not belong to her. They had reached the final stage, the transference. "There must always be one who remembers in silence," she said, "and one who forgets by screaming." Arenas knew what she meant. For centuries the bloodline had passed power not by scroll or sword, but by sacrifice of identity. One heir must carry the flesh, the other the void. He looked to the altar, where an empty basin waited, and he made the choice. No chance, no drama thinner. Her shadow moved independent of her. She stepped toward the basin, dipped her fingers in her brother's memory blood, and drew the 8th sigil on the wall, completing the circle. He walked forward and took the obsidian blade from the cradle of bone. His skin peeled like parchment, revealing the calligraphy of his ancestors written across his ribs. Blood didn't spill. It crawled, slithering up the altar, forming a spiral of words around the basin, and from his lips came the low hum, the melody of continuity. "You will forget your name," Varel warned. He nodded. It was never mine to keep. With one swift motion, Arenas drew the blade across his chest, not to kill, but to loosen. "We eat what remembers, so that forgetting becomes holy." Varel stood now. The house side, far below, in catacombs no map had recorded. Every skeleton exhaled dust. Every heartbeat in the bloodline paused for one breathless second, and then resumed. Louder, the rite was whole. The house would survive another century. But now, Arenas no longer knew his name. He stood beside his sister, eyes dull, smile gentle, a hollowed servant of the line. Above the manor, the moon turned red, and in villages miles away, children woke with bleeding ears, whispering names they'd never been told. The Valmarith legacy would not die, not while flesh remembered, and memory had just eaten again. Thank you for staying with us, until the very last breath of the Valmarith legacy. If this story made your skin crawl, or your thoughts linger a little longer in the dark, then maybe, just maybe, subscribe if you dare to keep walking these forgotten corridors of history. Hit the bell so you won't miss the next secret unearthed. Like this video if you think truth tastes better when soaked in blood and myth. And remember, some bloodlines end with a grave, others with a whisper. See you in the next ritual.